Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. The very beginning of a brand new series is here. Always an exciting time. This is Foundation Paper Piecing Series 4. I can't even believe I'm actually saying that because I was reluctant to film Foundation Paper Piecing Series 1 because I just didn't think there were enough people interested in foundation paper piecing. I hadn't done it in decades. And to my surprise, my happy surprise, there were so many people that had either attempted it and had a bad experience, that was me, and just wanted someone to step them through the process one step at a time so they could catch on to this really fun facet of quilting. And so here we are with series 4, all brand new projects, and I can't wait to show you how to do foundation paper piecing. If you already know this, there's nothing I'm going to teach you today that you don't already know. And so if you just want the company, I'm thrilled you're here. Foundation paper piecing is so much fun because we have paper on one side and fabric on the other. And you're like, how's that process happen? I'm going to talk you through that. This is going to be a longer video, and that's because I want to cover every facet of this, every component of this, so that you absolutely have complete confidence when you get your kit that you can open that up, follow along with me, and be completely successful, and your project looks just like that. So that's the way to go, of course. You're not only getting all of the exact fabrics here, I can't wait to tell you about the fabrics, but also a full color pattern. I love full color patterns. You're also getting something called foundation paper. These are the foundation papers that we're going to be attaching our fabric to. These are things that we'll be temporarily attaching our fabrics to and later on removing. That is not regular printer paper. Ask me, I learned that the hard way. This is Carol Doak foundation paper. It's like a newspaper print where it's light but strong. And this is the gold standard of foundation paper piecing. If you ever have a project you find, once you learn how to do foundation paper piecing, if you ever find a project maybe on the internet or you have a book at home that's asking you to Xerox a page a number of times, be sure to pick up the Carol Doak foundation papers. But if you're getting a Shabby Fabrics kit, you do not need this. So I'm putting that aside right now because that is what we use to Xerox, make copies of your foundation papers. So when you get a kit from Shabby, all of the foundation papers are included in your kit, and stickers, what I'm going to talk about here shortly, and you're going to figure out why these are pretty important. So we go to great lengths to make sure that your kit has everything you need to do the project. The only thing you'll need to be adding will be either some fusible fleece or batting, and we're going to be using a few tools, but really it's a very fun process, and I'm excited to talk to you about that. Let's talk about the fabrics though that you can be expecting in each kit each month. This is not a club, by the way. We're just doing an opportunity for you to follow along with tips and techniques each month. But in this particular month, and we've actually never done this before, this is a blend of screen printed cotton. These are hydrangeas in the garden fabrics from our collection with Riley Blake. A very popular collection right now, hydrangeas in the garden, as well as the beautiful gingham binding. But these really dynamic kind of watery color are batik. So if you have not checked out our amazing selection of batik, including the 1895 by Hoffman, this kind of speckled print right here, I think it's called the 885. These were just a beautiful combination of batik and screen printed cotton. Again, we don't normally mix those types of substrates in one project, and I was so excited to do that because it was just the perfect combination. And this also gives you complete, well, a green light. If you sometimes see batik, but you see certain cottons you want, blend them together. It's all okay. We don't have to have a quilt that's either all cottons or all batik. We can blend those, and as you can see, the result is absolutely beautiful. Let's talk about foundation paper piecing, the process of that, some disciplines about that, and we're going to actually do a portion of this together a few times so you can catch the rhythm of this. As I mentioned, in your pattern, you're going to be getting a full color imagery, so you can see when you open up your kit, oh yes, that's my blue 1, that's my blue 2, that's my blue 3. You're identifying those fabrics. The first thing I actually want you to do before you make your first cut is add some sizing. It can be anything you want, any brand you want. Add that to your fabric and press that fabric out good and flat. We like to add sizing to the fabric because it just adds stability. And the more stability that we have, the cleaner the press will be, the flatter the block will be. It's a better journey every time we add sizing and make our cuts. We want to make sure we're making nice clean cuts. So if it's been a while since you've changed the blade in the rotary cutter, all the normal things you'd expect anytime you're cutting your fabrics out for a kit, just change that blade. I mentioned there's stickers. What's that sticker business? When you make your cuts for foundation paper piecing, the reason we've included those stickers here is you're not just going to go through and cut your fabric and put it in a pile. Here's what I want you to do. If you want success and make this as stress-free as possible and as much fun as possible, that's why we do this. Make a cut and sticker. Make a cut and sticker. We know that most kits that you're going to find out anywhere in the world, some might include the foundations, almost no one includes stickers. We do this as a convenience for you because we were literally, when we first did our first series, we were writing stickers by hand and we were labeling our fabrics. And I thought, wouldn't customers want to do that too? And that's why early on we adopted that. Every single foundation paper piecing kit you get from Shabby Fabrics will obviously have the same fabrics you're seeing in the project, a full color tested pattern, your foundation papers as well as your stickers. That's a lovely combination. So here, our pattern is telling us to cut blue 1. Actually going to do 2 of those to 2.5 by 4.5 and label those A1 and D1. Now let's look at our stickers. Notice our first 2 stickers are A1 and D1. You're like, well, why doesn't that go A1, A2, A3? Because our stickers are in sequence with how you're cutting. So you can start here, sticker your first fabric. The next one is labeled D1. The next fabric is labeled A2, D2. So let's talk about why did we say A, B, C, and D? Because if you look at these stickers here, we have A's, we have D's, we have some B's and C's and E's. What is that all about? Let's look at our foundations. We have our A and our B, which, by the way, happens to be right here, is this portion of the left wing. This portion here happens to be that portion of the wing. Here on this side, do you see how each section has its own alphabet? So all that's saying is this is section A, section B, C, D, E. The process I'm going to show you is the same process whether you have 5 sections, 10 sections, or 30 sections. It's always the same. But just like any quilt block we would do with patchwork, you make this section, you make that section, maybe you make a middle section and you sew them together. Not different. It's just that we're doing this with paper. So this is a cousin of patchwork. It's just a little bit different. So I wanted to show you what is this section. So just like we do when we're working on patchwork, we always just work on one section at a time. This isn't different. So the first thing that we would do, and the section we'll be working on today is actually this one. Let me just cut that out. But here, I'm just going to cut to the outside of that outermost light colored line. Don't cut on that. That will be a trim up line that we'll be using later, right? And here I would just be cutting this apart, just like this. So do you remember how I said, make a cut, sticker, make a cut and sticker? And of course, once you've made the cuts and stickered, you will have no more stickers left here because the stickers are on all the fabric. So as you can imagine, let's look at section D. you're going to gather up all the piece Ds. They're going to have a variety of colors, right? We already looked at our wings, wherever I put those wings. Here they are. You're going to have all of these colors. Get these fabrics in order, D1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 9. Put those fabrics and this piece of paper together. Repeat that process with A and B and C. And for us here, let's do C. That's what we have here. So this is exactly what I have. I have my fabrics stickered and in order. If you get yourself organized this way, the rest is, the hard part's already over. We just did that, making sure we cut the fabrics per the pattern, got everything organized, and we're ready to go. So let's talk about this process. As you can see, I did the 2 wings, but I want to do a portion completely with you so that you're seeing this process and you catch the rhythm, because this is so worth it. Now, I will say this, foundation paper piecing is not intuitive at all. But once you catch the rhythm of this, you're like, oh, that's cool. And it is. Think of the geometry of all of what's possible because of just the geometry that happens with foundation paper piecing. All right, piece number 1 of each of the sections, in this case, C1. Let's look at these other pieces. Whether it's D1, E1, C1, A1, the first piece of each section is glued to the back side. I want you to remember something. Back of the paper, back of the fabric. Now with batik, there's usually not a front and back side, but with screen printed cotton, there absolutely is. So I want you to think about that. So I happen to be working with batik, but I want you to remember back side of the fabric would be the back side of the fabric is the contact we're going to make. That's why when we look at this side, it's the pretty side, right? Because the back side, let me try, I want to show you a fabric here. I guess these are all batiks. Maybe I can show you right there. See how the back side of that fabric was on the back side of that paper. So we happen to have batik, but I'll still talk to you as if this was a screen printed cotton, because this is a very important aspect of foundation paper piecing. Okay, so I said it needs to be glued. Never a liquid glue. We have our Soline glue pen. I love that. It comes with a refill. That's lovely. So let's get our foundation paper. And there's our sticker C1. I was asked the question recently, can we reuse the stickers? Of course. You can just put those right back on the sheet they came from if maybe you want to make this again with your fabric from your stash. So the goal here, let's talk about our goals. We're trying to make sure that our fabric, and this is true of every shape, not just this first piece, covers not only the footprint of C1, but 1/4 of an inch all the way around. For this reason, I like to have a light source. This happens to be the Wafer 1 Light Pad by Daylight. No matter what light source you're using, whether you're trying to hold this up to a sliding glass door, holding it up to the light, or a light source, I need to make sure, and you need to make sure, that we're covering completely C1 and 1/4 inch all the way around. So the first thing that I will do, so I'm just going to put a little bit of glue, and I'm just going to wrong side to wrong side, and now just look at this. Now, because this piece is so large, without too much effort, I can see we achieved that. And if that dried, or maybe I didn't put enough glue in, just make sure you're putting that in. Remembering, however, we will be removing this later, so don't get too glue happy. But we don't want that to be sliding around. Now, I can see pretty easily, but if we want to be sure, I'll turn this on so you can see this. Now look, without question, that blue comes all the way up here, all the way down here, and I completely have that on the sides. So we're good to go for our very first piece. The next thing we're going to do is using a product called Add a Quarter ruler. And this is a Add a Quarter Plus, I should say. When this company first created the Add a Quarter, which is completely meant for foundation paper piecing, it was first called Add a Quarter. But Add a Quarter Plus is so much better. Why? Because it provides a tapered edge on one side and a lip on the other. Both are very important. Now, you can either buy these individually as 6-inch rulers or 12-inch or buy the combo. For small projects, all small little projects, usually the 6-inch will work. Pink or yellow, they're the same. They do the same job. Pick your favorite color. But on long runs, and we have a long run, some of these longer projects you might do later on might exceed the 6-inch and you wish you had the 12. Just get the combination. That will cover you for projects now and in the future. Notice there's a line in common between C1 and C2. I'm going to use the tapered edge. I'm going to place that just slightly to the left of the line with the whole goal of holding that good and steady to fold my paper over the top very succinctly. And if I missed it at all, go back and refold that. You want to be right on that line. Right on that line. I'm happy with that. All right. Now, with the same Add a Quarter, we're going to rotate that around so the Add a Quarter, look how this locks in. Look at that. Isn't that a great product? The distance from that fold to the edge is 1/4 inch, right? Didn't they do a great job naming that? So now we're going to begin a process called Trim, Sew, Press, TSP. Think of baking, right? Teaspoon, TSP. So that distance from the fold to here is now 1/4 inch. Think about our next step is actually going to be very similar to patchwork. If I had one piece of fabric here and I want to attach it to this piece of fabric, let's say it's a 3-inch square and this is a 3-inch square. What do? Right side together and sew. All right. Well, in order to get the next piece going, I would grab my C2. Now, I need to place this. Let's pretend that this is going to be the pretty side, right? Just like you would, there's going to be right sides together. Now, I have to make sure, am I in the right location? I put this in position, simulate sewing 1/4 inch, and I flip it. This is again where I like to have my light source available to make sure if I position this properly or not, did I get the coverage that I need, which is, as we know, 1/4 inch all the way around. Let's look. Okay, I'll show you what would happen if I put this fabric here, trying to match those edges right there. Let's look. I still have it, but not as much as I would like. I'm going to now, I want better coverage, okay? I'm going to position this here, simulate. Now look how much cover, oh yes, that's a very good spot. Okay, so once you have found, I like that spot, you're going to turn it to the proper side where you're seeing the writing, and we're going to add a pin. That pin is out of the way of where I'm going to sew. Let's talk about where we're going to sew, how we're going to sew. The first thing we're going to do is pull our stitch length back. The default on the BERNINA is a 2.5. Your machine at home, whether it's a BERNINA or not, is probably a 2.5. Bring that all the way back to a 1.5. Why? We want more thread in a given distance. We do all of our assembly of our foundations with a white, gray, or black thread, usually a gray. I just happen to have a white today. But because our stitch length is so short at a 1.5, I'm never going to see this thread. You don't have to worry about doing any of this piecework right now with this. This is just for top quilting. So I just wanted to mention that. I've been asked that question before. I like to sew with a size 70 Microtex sharp needle, size 7010. This needle is so sharp. It's finer than the size 8012 I normally do patchwork with. I love how it perforates the paper. It is so sharp. All right, where are we going to be sewing? So let's point that out real quick here. So we know that later on a piece is going to be going into this section. So what I recommend that you do is you're starting just before that line, just before the line. Sew directly on that line and we can sew straight off, okay? You could, I'm going to say this, if you wanted to start here, sew directly on, sew on the line, and stop just after that line. That's fine. It does not matter whether you start here and stop there or start a little bit before the line, sew on the line and sew off. Doesn't matter. Pick your favorite, but that's where we're going to sew. Remember I said TSP, trim, sew, press. So I'm going to make sure my iron is heating up to full hot, and then we'll go ahead and sew on our shortened stitch length with our Microtex size 70 needle. Okay, and remember I said press. We at Quilt Retreat, when there's 4 makers on one table with 1 iron, I see a lot of makers reaching for the Clover roll and press. I'll show you what that looks like. A great option. And in fact, Kelly, who is one of our makers, does this even though her iron's right next to her. Look what a great job it does. Incredible. And you can see batik is a great option for foundation paper piecing. Look how flat that is. I didn't even touch an iron with that. So a great option. If you've got kiddos, your kids or grandkids, and you're worried about the hot iron, forget that. Just use a Clover roll and press. It's safe. You can relax. You don't have to worry about the kids pulling down a hot iron, right? Or unplugging that iron. Because once you have your fabrics really iron ready to go, you're going to be doing a lot of this process that you don't need to iron for. All right. Same process. So we did trim, sew, press. Guess what? We just do another round trip of that. So I'm going to make this block with you so you catch the rhythm of this and how fun this is. So of course, where do we go next? The wall between 2 and 3, right? Think about that. So what are we going to do? Our add a quarter ruler, our tapered edge. Remember how we start stitching just a little before that line? So if you need to pull that paper back just to touch and tear that in order to get a clean fold, go for it. You need to do that sometimes. Remember, we're not trying to keep the paper. We're going to be tearing it away later on. Just make a little bit of tear, not too much. Again, the tapered edge is just to the left of the line of C3, allowing me to fold that over very succinctly. I always check it to make sure, did I get that fold directly on the line? We did. I give a nice, clean, crisp fold. Check it one more time. Turn this around. Lock this in. I literally slide this up and down to make sure I'm all the way up here, right? Here, right, I'm not against the, look at that. It's locked in. So now again with trim, we know our piece C3. Let's, right, this would be the pretty side if this, the batik doesn't really have a right or wrong side. I can see I definitely have that. So let's pin, we'll pin from this side. Now let's look. Where are we going to sew? Easy, I love this. Off the paper, straight on the paper, straight off. I don't have another section down here I need to be careful I'm not kind of encroaching upon. So I'll go ahead and sew from here, straight on the line and straight off again. Okay, we know after we sew, we press. All right, let's see what's next. Piece 4. Add a quarter, left of the line, fold the paper. Looks beautiful. Add a quarter, roll this around, lock that in, trim, piece 4. Right side together. We know with a batik there really isn't right and wrong side. Looks great. Okay. We're going to sew here to here. Okay, let's press that out. That's cool. Okay, so this looks kind of goofy, right? You're like, what is that? This is my favorite part of foundation paper piecing because it takes this, which to me feels very chaotic, right? You're like, what are we doing? Let's talk about this. Next step, very important. Each section, let's look at these, has been so carefully engineered. We create these foundation papers at Shabby. We have figured out the geometry so that if you cut exactly on these lines, including that little notch right there, you see that little jog? That's not a mistake. That's not a, we didn't draw it right. That's there for a reason. These tiny little things that look like imperfections are what creates a perfect alignment. So I just wanted to mention that because I've seen people kind of think that was an imperfection, put their ruler from here to there and just cut a straight line and they kind of cut that off. No, that's what's there for you. Watch how I put on a straight line. I love this 2.5 by 12.5. See this dash line right here? I put that dash line directly on that line, right, the solid line, until I almost can't see the dash line anymore. Now I know I'm exactly where I should be every single time. So I start this cut and this little jog right here, this little tiny jog, which is almost no distance at all, I know is there for a reason. So I'll put my ruler there, make this extra little jog in the corner. There we go. And a nice long straight edge. Again, till my dash line, look at that, till it basically disappears because it becomes part of that solid line. There's another little jog right there. You can see how careful I am being, and that's not just because I'm doing video. I would be this careful in real life. I will show you why being very careful with that is going to pay dividends right now. We have assembled our center portion of our butterfly, and we can see this is the upper portion. We had our A and our B, which were joined, right? We had that joined, and notice how the paper's missing in the seam allowance. And this is something we mention in our pattern. Notice we kept the rest of the foundation papers on, and you want to do that too. We just remove the foundation once these pieces are joined into one. We had our section B, we had our section A, place them right side together, and sew directly on that line. We remove the foundation in the seam allowance only because later on, now, when we get ready to sew all of this together, it reduces the bulk. So we already know here that this is going to be on the one side, and we have the same where we removed the foundation from the seam. But let's look at this here. Those little extra jogs that we talked about that are very subtle will pay dividends right now. And because we did not remove our foundation paper, look what's going to happen here. When I place this right side together, besides there being a perfect positioning, look at that in that corner, that little jog right there. And down here, do you see the solid line? Do I need to find a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or did we already draw that for you? We drew it for you. This makes it so easy to be right on the mark because you're not having to track a 1/4 inch away from the edge on your own. You're sewing on a drawn line. For this reason, and because we're still sewing on paper, another question I often get is, when you're joining the sections, am I still on a shortened stitch length? Yes. As long as paper is still involved, you keep sewing on that shortened stitch length because we want to add a lot of strength and stability, because we want it to perforate the paper with a shortened stitch length. And when we remove the paper, having that more thread in a given distance keeps everything stable while that paper is being removed. Pinning, very important right now. I am not pinning out here. I'm going to pin here because I want to keep that pin in position now. I'm not going to pin in the track that I'm sewing. I'm going to pin in the beginning, I'm going to pin in the end, and then everything in between. The best part about pinning, and I'm using patchwork pins, here, those pins are not coming out. I used to be a person that pinned out here. Guess what? Every time I approached a pin, I had to stop, pull the pin out, and sew. Why are we doing that? Why not keep the pins on this side of the equation so they're doing work, holding everything steady the whole time? When I changed this about my sewing, my accuracy went up nearly twice as much. I was pinning so carefully only to remove it from the most tender intersection, right? A pinwheel is a great example. You don't want to remove a pin right before you get there. You want the pin in place the whole time so nothing's moving. Do you see how now I just sew? That's my only job now, is to come right off the edge, sew straight on that line, straight off the other end, get my, I am going to iron this one because there's a lot more going on. And right now the arrows, once we sew this, are saying we're going to be pressing toward our middle of our butterfly. So let's go ahead and do this, and we'll see how beautiful we're going to put our butterfly together today. Another question that I get asked sometimes with foundation paper piecing is, notice how when we assembled our C-section, notice I never backstitched. I don't do that. I do that when I do regular patchwork at times. Maybe I'm adding a border before and after, right? I'm going to backstitch in the beginning, backstitch in the end when I put that border on. But not in foundation paper piecing. So that's just something you don't need to be doing. All right. So let's look at that. That told us to go ahead and press toward our center of our butterfly body here. Now we certainly can remove our foundations here since they've done their job. There may be just a little bit of contact when we sew this side on, right down in this section. Hear that? It almost sounds like it's just perforated, because it really is. This is where I love to use any tweez. I have my tweezers to help me get anything out of these nooks and crannies. I can't get my fingers in. Definitely later on, some of these little tight little places, I use those tweezers. But you see how we're able to remove just where we want to remove. Any little place like this that's hard to get to, it's like another pair of hands helping you out right in those intersections. I think that did the trick. All right, Let's get rid of that. So we know we've pressed toward the body. Same thing. Same thing. Notice the nomenclature on the paper itself. This side joins section C, and if you flip it over, that's section C. It says on the C papers, this side joins the AB unit. AB unit. All the more reason, don't take those papers off. The paper's helping you be successful. So once again, I'm going to pin here on this side, so I never have to remove my pin. Pin here, right there, pin in between. All right, I'll go sew that. You've already seen me do that. I'll sew directly on the line and press toward the middle of the butterfly's body, and then let's talk about adding the borders. Wow, look at how beautiful this is. Look at this butterfly. Look at this. It's beautiful. You can't achieve this in patchwork. It can't happen. You wouldn't know what angle to cut this to with a standard ruler, right? This is what foundation paper piecing does for you. And this is why so many people absolutely love doing this. All right, once you have that, we still don't take off our foundation papers. They're working for us. How are they going to work for us next? Well, it's time for us to put on our side borders. And yes, if I remove the paper right now, have I done this out of my enthusiasm? Yes. Have I regretted it? Yes. Because this block becomes unstable. It comes a little bit wonky. All of the bias that's happening right now. The best part about leaving this on, besides the fact that it stabilizes the fabric, is there's a gift on the back side of this thing right now. And what is the gift? That line again. The 1/4 inch seam allowance again. So I'm going to pin this here in this corner. And you know I'm going to pin from this side down in that corner. I'm pinning from this side and putting a few pins, checking, make sure it didn't creep underneath here. And one here. And you could really pin the other side, right? So let's see. Why do I not want to pin on this side? Normally we're used to that, right? The bigger side down, the smaller piece on top. I don't know why, we do. Because I'm better with a drawn line. We all are. That's why we're going to take advantage of the gift we've been given, of the opportunity to sew on a drawn line. Every single time you are given that gift, take it. All right. Pin, pin. Let's make sure that nothing creep back. Isn't that nice that you can pre-cut your borders to the exact length and know for certain they're going to fit, right? With traditional patchwork, that is not always the case, let's be honest. You do an intricate block of patchwork. If you pre-cut your borders to frame that, most of the time my block is slightly smaller than it should be because my error is to generally sew a little bit chunky with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that's really why the seam guides have helped me out so much. All right, I'm going to sew directly on both of those lines. And per our pattern, it's having us press to the outside. Once we do that, we attach the top and bottom borders the same way. But let's get this sewn. I want to show you what this looks like. It's so lovely to have this drawn line. Let's get busy. You know, with traditional patchwork, intricate patchwork blocks, a beginner struggle because they don't have the experience. The great thing about foundation paper piecing, whether you're brand new, you've never done this before, or you're a master quilter, everyone can achieve these results straight away. And isn't that lovely? There are so many things in life, skiing, ice skating, patchwork, you name it, where it takes years to get really good at it. I love that foundation paper piecing takes that away because of the process and the precision the paper makes it that a beginner, as I said, can be absolutely successful straight away. So let's look at that now. We're going to warm up our fabric. I think my iron cooled down there when I was talking, and we press to the outside. These fabrics here, this hydrangea print, this one here, and this, as I said, was part of our Hydrangeas in the Garden collection with Riley Blake, our first fabric collection with Riley Blake. And it has been an absolute joy working with the amazing team at Riley Blake. They have so much heart. They're so patient with me because I didn't know what I was doing, right? I've only designed fabric a few times before, and what a blessing. And they got the pearl finish, and so many of these fabrics is perfect. So thank you again, Riley Blake. I know I keep telling you this, but I'm going to tell it to you again. It's been a privilege and a joy to work with their team. Okay, iron's heating up. Now we have our side borders on. Now, of course, we're going to be working with our top and bottom borders. And because we have been sewing directly on that line, everything should be locked in. So once again, we'll be placing the pretty side together, right sides together. We're going to flip to this side. And that's a little bit weird, right? How we select, ooh, where's my paper? I like my paper, my pacifier, my easy way of doing this. You can always either add a seam guide to guide you into this, or sometimes what I like to do is go, you know what? I love the idea of sewing on a line. I will extend it myself. We're going to be using the friction pen later on anyway. Use it. I lay my ruler down along my line, just to the left of it, because remember the tip of our friction pen has a certain distance, and I just draw that on. There is absolutely no shame in that. I would rather do that than seam rip any day of the week. I do not like seam ripping, okay? That is not my favorite thing to do. Just to the left, we're going to draw the line. Okay, now we'll place this right side together. Let's pin the beginning and the end. We know that has to happen. Make sure nothing kind of snuck underneath there. And I'm going to start a pin on the diagonal here, diagonal over here. Pin as much as you want to pin. The whole goal, nothing moves. That's all we're trying to do. Oh, it dove under just a little bit here. I'm going to pin twice over there. I don't want anything moving. Pin one more time right there. Okay, here, same stitch length. We can do the same on the other border, press to the outside. That's what we're going to be doing. Look at that. Look how beautiful it is. Just get off my little press to the outside, right? Our pattern lets us know that. I'll repeat the same for the bottom border. I just want you to be able to see it, how pretty that is, how the borders fit. So we already know, of course, with this side, we'll place these right side together. Obviously from this side, draw the line if you'd like, add a seam guide, however you want to get to this edge at the same distance, 1/4 inch, sew on the line, press the outside. That is when you start removing the paper. So I'll do all of that off camera. I'll just kind of show you these little nooks and crannies. You kind of saw me do that already, where my fingers just don't go. Grab for these, the Gypsy Quilter tweezers. They're very, very sharp. So I'll add that border, press to the outside. I'm going to get all of my paper removed because the next step is I'll be using a piece of Cali Dell fusible fleece. I love this fusible fleece. And my backing fabric, because we're going to make a quilt sandwich, and this is when we start using our thread set. So I'm going to go ahead and do all those steps again. Attach my border, press the outside, remove my paper. I'm going to also thread my machine, probably with this beautiful blue, because we can stitch on our butterfly's body. I want to show you that. And that'll be on a regular stitch length, or maybe like a 2.2, depending on what feels right. And then we'll move into what do we do next, right? I'll talk you through the journey of this. I mentioned it was going to be a longer video. Take a break if you need to, grab a snack. I'm going to go ahead and put these borders on and get the paper removed, and I'll be right back, and we'll continue making our butterfly. So our block has all of the papers removed. I've repressed the block nice and flat. As I mentioned, we love using fusible fleece because of the fusible component. You can certainly use batting if you wish, obviously a great choice, but we want to make a quilt sandwich now. We have our top here. If you are going to be using batting, you'll want a piece bigger than your project, and your backing would be, of course, face down. So this is kind of the sequence. Backing is face down, and for us, this is the Cali Dell. This is the face up portion. This is our actual glue side. So I'm going to put the backing aside for now. I just kind of wanted to show you that quilt sandwich. So I'll place this on here. When we use a fusible fleece like Cali Dell, I like to put the fusible fleece on the back side of the block. That way it's in the most direct contact, because I don't want anything slipping around when we're doing our top quilting. Now I'm going to be very careful to not touch this part with my iron. If you have any concerns, you could use a piece of parchment paper, because it will release from the parchment paper if you get any glue on parchment paper. But I'm just going to be very careful. I start in the middle and kind of work in all 4 directions, getting this attached. Now, if you're going to be using batting instead, however you would normally create your quilt sandwich and attach to that, most people would use either conventional pins, safety pins, or some people love using the Clover Wonder pins. So we can pretend that this isn't attached, right? Pretty side down again. Here, what I will be doing, will be using my 505 and just kind of smearing this and placing this together so I can create my sandwich. If that was, let's say I had batting, the Clover Wonder pins are a great option. Right? You simply insert these in between, attach them in various locations, right? And move on. Remove them as you need to. I like everything to just be held together kind of with fusible fleece and a little bit of 505. So I'm not dealing with the pins. They're kind of out of my way. So instead, what I will do is with my 505, because I can see the footprint of what I'm doing. Pretty side will be up now. I just smooth that together. Done, right? I'm not dealing with pins and moving pins as I go. Obviously, this works great for small projects. If this was a larger wall hanging, I'm going to be using the Clover Wonder pins. So I like using fusible fleece, so at least part of my project is attached, and then a little bit of Clover Wonder pins. If it's a large quilt, I'm using batting every time, and we have a nice selection of batting on our website, even including bamboo. So depending on the size you want and the type of batting, we most likely have it. Okay, so you can see now how this is ready to go. Now we're going to zero in on our project. Gone are the days where we're trying to stitch in the ditch. Number one, we hit and miss most of the time. This beautiful thread set allows us to just get exactly where we want to be, where we're stitching, quilting all the way through this, where you can see, we'll get in close and you can see why hide this beautiful thread, right? For makers that do patchwork, we're usually using with white, gray, or black. We get to sew with thread that's beautiful colors, finally. Why am I hiding that? I'm not going to be doing that. So we're going to be stitching just a little bit on the inside. I'll thread my machine. In fact, I'll do that right now real quick. I'll just put this up on the top so I can leave that in there. And we'll do a little bit of our top quilting. I'm going to increase my stitch length back to a normal length of about a 2.5. It's such a small project, I can guide this easily. I don't need to use any kind of quilting gloves or anything like that. Really, we just did straight stitching to kind of just accentuate this beautiful butterfly and kind of quilt it all together, adding a little bit of our white out here again, just to attach it together like you would with any quilt, right? It's just a mini quilt. So I'll go ahead and get my machine threaded, and then let's go ahead and stitch the body here, the main part of our butterfly. So I'm going to sew just to the inside of this line. If you have a needle down feature in your machine, be sure to engage that. We want to be able to hit this corner, do a few stitches, hit that corner, and go back up. So I'll probably start somewhere along this. Maybe I'll just start in one of these corners here. That's probably a really good spot. And I want to kind of hand crank that down. And wherever that presser foot lands, I'm keeping track of that. And on my BERNINA, I have a part of my presser foot has this indentation. I'm kind of looking right here to keep that distance the same the whole time. Okay, here we go, just a few. Back up this side. One more, and let's go back and forward. One more. I better go back one more because I know the BERNINA is going to take one stitch. There we go. Okay, now look how that looks. Isn't that beautiful? Now let's look at our other thread. This thread is so beautiful. Look at these colors. Isn't it just fun to be able to get in here and do this little bit of quilting and put this whole thing together and just look so beautifully embossed? I don't get to do a whole lot of top quilting because normally we have big quilts and they get sent out. So this is actually a lot of fun for me, and this is why we very carefully choose the thread sets. You would, of course, keep going with all your other beautiful colors out here. You're stitching right inside your outer borders. Once everything is quilted, machine quilted, our next step is to, of course, begin to trim. I'll just pretend I did all my magic quilting. I'm kind of lining up here, making sure I'm trying to square this up. All right, because I want to start squaring up with something. So let's look at that. Let's see if I got the same distance along the edge here. Yes. All right, now that that has been squared up, I'm lining this up on the mat so I want this to be completely square. All right, now we've got 2 corners trimmed. So I'm going to set that right in a corner here and here. So we continue to be square. I'm now lining, I'm looking here and here. I'm not worrying about the border waving just a little bit. I want to square up the project. And now here, back in that 90-degree corner. See, I'm 90 degrees here, 90 degrees there. Okay, so let's look at our project. Look how beautiful that is. Beautiful. Okay, so we can see we're beautifully square. Now, before binding, a hanging sleeve. On the back of our project, we have a hanging sleeve. Let's talk about that. On our cutting instructions, on this beautiful binding right here, this one right here, we have you cut a 3 by width of fabric strip, and from that you're going to cut a 3 by 10 inch hanging sleeve piece. And of course you've got the rest of that strip, which is about 32 inches long, maybe a little bit longer. Notice how from that same strip, after you've cut your 3 by 10, you now take the part that's left over and cut a portion that is 2.5 inches wide. That's the normal binding strip width. If you like 2.25, if you like that, you'd be cutting this to a 2.25. We like 2.5 here because we always attach our border by machine and sew it down by machine in the end. We don't want to miss that binding strip in the back. We'll talk about that. So we, from the first 3 by width of fabric, cut 3 by 10 for the hanging sleeve. From the remainder, cut that to 2.5 by 30. And then there's another binding strip cut from the fabric that's in your kit. That's a 2.5 by width of fabric. Those 2 pieces of binding will be joined because one binding strip was not enough to make it around the perimeter of that. But first, let's talk about the hanging sleeve. You'll have a 3 inch by 10 inch, and you're simply going to fold that in by 1/2 inch if you want to be really precise. It doesn't have to be exact, by the way. But if you're like, nope, I love precision. Our favorite precision tool is our Clover hot ruler, where I can heat on this. I can put my iron directly on this. Notice the 1/2 inch mark. I'm just going to fold up my hanging sleeve till that touches that 1/2 inch and iron. Again, this is just a hanging sleeve. It does not need to be perfect, but if you ever want a project and you want to track exactly 1/4 inch all the way down a long run and you want to be perfect, the hot ruler is it. It is a phenomenal tool. I could leave this iron here all day. It will not hurt that. You can't do that with an acrylic ruler. You'll melt that, of course. And look how precise that is, right? And of course, we'll iron that down. Anyway, this is how we get that to be so precise as we use our hot ruler. Fold that in 1/2 inch and we simply top stitch that. We're now using a normal stitch length of a 2.5 or whatever you want to use on your machine. Fold that in by the 1/2. Once we have that, you're simply going to fold this in 1/2. As such. These instructions, by the way, let me show you where they are in the pattern. By the way, this is a great hanging option. If you don't want to display your project on the table and you have a workstation, this is perfect. Just put a little thumbtack and hang your display. You get to change it out every month. A great option, Ack felt hanger, they both are. This is the French curl, and it's a great option, the 12-inch French curl, or the table stand. Just wanted to mention that. Okay, so let's show you where we are in the pattern so you can follow right along. We're right back here, right? Remember how we tucked it in? We folded that in half. And look what this is telling us. On the back side of our project, on the back of our wall hanging, we're going to measure down 1 3/4 inches. Here comes that handy ruler again. So here we are, 1 1/2. So this is just under 1 3/8, right? Because remember that 1 1/2 is 1 4/8. So this is just under that. Now this is having us draw the line all the way across. Notice that our hanging sleeve isn't all the way across, so we don't have to necessarily, it's just in this meaty area, but I'll go ahead and draw that in. So that's 1 4/8, this is 1 3/8, right there. I know that this is really the area that is important to me, but I'm using a friction pen, and make sure you're using a friction pen, something that erases with heat. Okay, you don't want to be going to do those markings with a permanent marker and drawing outside here. Yes, it's on the back side of the project, but nobody wants to see those markings, right? Okay, once we've drawn that, the next thing that we're going to do is I'm just positioning this, I'm evenly positioning this. Now, if I want to be very specific, I could fold this in half, I could fold this in half and find where that the 2 folds are. Might as well do that since we've already done it right there. Now we will pin. I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch from here to here. Why 1/8 of an inch? Because later on when we attach the binding, it'll be 1/4 of an inch. So I want to make sure I'm on, but I'm only going to be using 1/8 of an inch. And I can use a regular stitch length or something longer, doesn't matter. And I see that I have my thread blue. Doesn't matter because we're not going to see that, but I will go ahead and change that for the next step. So now that this is attached, you notice how the line is above that. That's good. We're going to scoot this up because this is what creates the tunnel for the stand or the dowel to go through here. So that's the next step that we're going to be doing here. Okay. So that, of course, we can't do that by machine, or we'd be stitching through to the front of our project, right? So this is where a little bit of hand sewing. So I like to use my Richard Hemming size 4. You can use the same thread that we're going to be stitching the borders with, and I grab a long length, longer than you think you should, because I like to use 2 strands, but how I actually do 2 strands is I get one very long strand and bring the 2 ends together. So I want you to see this process. Doesn't have to happen this way. You could do 2 separate strands and knot it. I just had the knot come out too many times. So this is what I do now. One very long strand. Bring both ends up, push this through, and now what I've done is this down here creates a loop. Lovely. Why is that helpful? By the way, if you have any issues threading needles, Clover Needle Threader is a great option. So far I've got the eyes to thread a needle because I have good glasses. But if that changes, I will be reaching for those that needle threader. If you feel like you want to kind of pin that in place and remove those as you go, you can do that. Probably a great option so you know where you're stitching. But I want to take you through this journey in case you've not done a whole lot of stitching. Obviously the goal is to secure the hanging sleeve to the back and the batting only and have no stitches come to the front. So we're not down and up, or we're going to the front. We could do that by a sewing machine. We're being very shallow. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here shallow. And remember how I have this loop here? I want to show you on the mat so you can see it. Look what's going to happen. I'm going to pass the needle through, and I've now secured this with no knots. Hello, this is going nowhere except being secure, right? I love that I don't have to worry about, when I say this is going nowhere, what I mean is it can't come out. This isn't going anywhere. I've had knots where later on, after contact and touching, that probably just didn't do a very good knot, and it came undone, and the whole back of the project started coming undone. Now that I've threaded that and I've caught that loop, I'm very horizontal with the needle, and I'm just catching the bottom, just like this, all the way down. Notice nothing is coming to the front. I feel I'm very shallow. And because I have 2 strands instead of 1, this is incredibly strong. And you just continue all the way across. Like that. See, nothing's coming to the front. Okay, I'll come all the way across. I'm going to tie off. That part's done, and then we're going to attach our binding, and our project is almost ready to be, well, displayed. So just as I'm getting toward the very end here on my last stitch, I make sure I get the corner, of course. Come shallow, just like we've been doing. And I go back through this loop at least once. How about, let me say this, at least twice. Make sure everything's good and secure. To tie off, I kind of just run it through underneath kind of shallow and scoot out up over somewhere else, like downstream. Now, that thread is buried here. So this is in a very good and secure position. So now our hanging sleeve is ready to go, and now we're going to begin to attach our binding. Now we want to make sure we don't take any bubbles and get any kind of weird here. So sometimes if you want to even pin this out of position, out of the way, you can. I haven't ran into a lot of problems with that. And because I'm going to be attaching my binding from the front, I don't usually like to have pins on the back. If I was going to do that, I would use a flower head pin. It's a flat profile instead of having a round head on that pin. So I just wanted to mention that. All right, let's trim off any threads. Now, binding. Binding, if you already have a binding technique, bind. That's it. That's the last step we're going to be doing. If you're like, I'm so new at this, I don't have a binding technique. Well, here's the great news. We have recorded a video on how to do that. We like to straight away, when we are cutting our fabric for our binding, we like to get a glitzy binding holder. Binding's never been a fun thing for me, and many quilters find it a chore. I do. But if you have it, maybe something pretty to wrap it around and display, you're not going to lose the strip. It's easy to lose in the midst of a myriad of your sewing room if you don't bind your projects right away. So anyway, we like to keep it safe and sound, tucked away or displayed. It's kind of fun. So let me give you a binding tip, if you don't have your preferred binding technique, I'll give you a simple one, super easy. Remember that strip I talked about? That was that leftover strip from after we made our hanging sleeve. Remember, we cut a 3 by width of fabric. We cut that to 10 inches and put that aside. Then we take the leftover strip and we subcut that to 2.5 by 30 inches. And then we took a width of fabric strip and we joined them into one continuous strip, okay? Once we've done that, what I like to do is I like to create a 45-degree angle, and I use my corner clipper for that. I make a cut, and the next thing I do is I fold that down. You could use the hot ruler for that again. That's a great option. And let me look, there's my quarter on this side, where I'm folding to this line here. Does it need to be exactly a quarter? No. It's not patchwork, right? We're not doing patchwork. There you do need to be right on the mark at a quarter. But I fold it over by 1/4 of an inch. Give a good press. I remove this. So what this does now, and I'm going to fold that back down and press this. What that does for us, oh, I just made a little mess. Let's do that again. Fold that down. There we go. What that does for us, because this is going to be both our beginning of our binding and the end, is we don't have a raw edge there. We can't have a raw edge there. So that's a way of having that folded under, just like we did with our hanging sleeve. We don't have raw edges. Remember, we tucked that under by 1/2 inch and we stitched that. This little bit of excess right here, this little excess flag, I trim away. All right. This is the easiest binding technique you're ever going to use. It works all the time. Can be used on any project you want to do, large or small. You can start on any side that you want. Just don't start in the corners. So let's say that I want to start right there. Sounds like a good idea? Sure. I might just pin that in place to start with so nothing's moving. But the first thing I'm going to do in pretty short order is I'm going to start here. I'm going to back stitch a quarter inch seam. I'm actually going to open up this flap so it almost makes that pin unnecessary. And I'm going to stitch down a good 5 or 6 inches and stop, cut my thread, close this back up, and we'll resume sewing with 1/4 of an inch about here. That's going to keep this open, so when I come back all the way around, that tail's going to tuck in here. This is what I want you to remember. When we get to 1/4 of an inch from that corner, I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to sew at a 45-degree right off this thing. So that's yet another technique I've never actually taught in a binding video. Normally I stop 1/4 of an inch here, backstitch, stop, cut my thread, and I don't sew on that 45. This is a technique I've adopted recently that helps me get a very succinct fold. You'll see what I'm talking about. You'll see why this might be a great option of something you might want to adopt in your own sewing room. All right, so I'm just going to start. We're going to backstitch. I'm opening this up, and I'm going to keep that open. Notice I'm running that edge right along. You can see my edge here, about down here. Okay, maybe there. That's probably far enough. Now I'm kind of keeping track of where that was. Oh, right there. All right. Again, we'll backstitch. Now, where this is down here, this 1/4 of an inch, you just kind of have to visually guess where that is. Probably right about there in that flower. I'm going to stop, pivot this thing at a 45-degree angle, and sew right to that corner. That's the goal. See, I can see this is the end right here, because I can see where that kind of scoops over that. And I'm looking right here too. And I probably went a little bit past it. Let's see here. Let me have a peek. No, I think I'm actually in a great spot. I'm gonna throw this thing over my shoulder. All right, now I'm gonna turn. I can see this right here. I want you to see that. I'm aiming right for that corner right now. Cut my thread. Okay. What that's gonna do for me is it already sets up this angle, which is what I need. I need that. Look at this beautiful miter right here. So now this sets me up. See how I folded that back on itself? Just like that. I'm going to come right onto it from off the edge, right onto this. We'll do it again in the other corner. I want you to see that twice. Getting close. Right there. Lift that up. Pivot. I want you to see that corner right there is what I'm going for. It's like this extension. This is the cluck cluck sew diagonal tape. I'm visually extending this line to that corner right now is what I'm looking at. Cut my thread. Okay, so you've now seen this twice. See how there's this angle created right there? So now when I fold back, it's helping direct that angle. It's a phenomenal way to miter these corners. Once I have that, I fold the fabric back on top of itself. Okay, let me do the other two corners. I'm going to be careful across the top. I don't take a tuck where the hanging sleeve is, and then I'm going to come back when we're right in this ballpark, and I'm going to show you how to tuck that end in and finish up the project. Okay, I'll just stop there because I want you to see here. Obviously the tail is too long. Well, we're going to be tucking that tail inside here. So I'm going to probably cut it about here. Now let's look at what we've created here. That little valley we created allows us to tuck the tail right inside there, just like that, like a little sleeping bag. Now we'll come back and secure it. How cool is that? Look at that. I don't stitch this down. Here, I'll come to the forward camera and overhead camera so we can talk about next steps. But isn't that an easy way to do binding? Okay, so look at that. We've got our binding on. We have a little bit of extra binding here. Fun fabric for maybe a scrap quilt. Put that aside. Okay. How we like to do bindings. I'm always grabbing for my Wonder Clips. Always grabbing for my Wonder Clips. Here is, I like to even press that to just encourage the binding where it needs to go. Love to press that out. All right. I like to go ahead and clip everything to the back. So we can just start here if we want to. Remember that we like to go ahead and sew this is the one time we do stitch in the ditch here, and also with a white here. And I have a white in my bobbin as well. Remember that since we're going to be sewing from the front side, the pretty part of the clip is going to be up with us because the flat side needs to be on your table. So just sometimes I see people putting in wonder clips upside down. Don't do that. Because if you put it like this, look at this profile. This is not going to sit flat on your table at all. One of the keys to binding well is number one, we did good miters in the corner, but make sure that your binding is up against, hard against the edge of your quilt. Don't let there be air in between because that can vary. But if you always fold the binding strongly against remember we did a very good job of making sure that this was cut totally square. That's another thing, right? Cutting it totally square. But now that I've got my corner done, like up in my miter, now I'm going to fold this over just like that. That's how we get a very succinct miter in that corner. And we don't get rounded corners all the way down, just like this. I'm rolling this with my fingers all the way to the back. See how we're getting a beautiful, let me show you again in this corner, where I don't have air. I'm pushing, I'm rolling that. That's why it's succinct. That's why our corners are 90 degrees. I push it all the way till I see 90 degrees, flip this back over, just like that, and clip in that corner. That's how we're going to get this nice and tight. And then of course when we get ready to sew, we're sinking that needle just inside. In fact, I'll do that. I'm going to sink the needle just inside here. We just don't want to hit our binding strip. Just be careful, right? Just be consistent here. All the way down. And because you've pressed all the way to the back, you're absolutely going to be catching the binding on the back. All right, so obviously I would clip the whole thing, have it all done, but let me just show you a portion here so you can see stitching in the ditch. I like to have my box of wonder clips right next to me, so I'm just dropping them in. Once you get to the corner, stop, needle down right there. Pivot and go. Okay, let me back up here and I'll just show you what we've got. Cut my thread. And you can see how pretty that looks. And we absolutely caught the binding on the back. And that's because we cut our binding strips to 2.5. Look how beautiful that is. Very beginner-friendly project here. So you can see, just like everything in quilting, it looks complicated if you follow some processes. We went through that, stayed organized in foundation paper piecing. You saw that's important, right? Just focus on one section at a time, right? We got our fabrics cut, we got our fabric sticker, we made our A pile, B pile, C, D, E. Do TSP, trim, sew, press. Make the sections work, keep those papers on. They helped us all along the way. We sewed our sections together. We already had our wings ready. We sewed those to our center. Even when we sewed our borders on, remember we kept our paper on because the line was drawn and we have beautiful borders sewn on. We got everything quilted. Again, you can choose Cali Dell Fusible Fleece is a great option. Just a little bit of 505 to glue it all together. If you're like, nope, I use batting. Okay, wonder clips might be a perfect choice for you to hold that all together. A little bit of top quilting with our beautiful thread set. Get everything trimmed up. Of course, we added our hanging sleeve, just a little bit of hand sewing there. The Richard Hemming size 4 is a great option for you. We put our binding on, choose any technique you want, and then the project is ready to display either on the table stand or on that French curl as we mentioned, or maybe some other technique, whatever you want to do. But all I'm hoping that you do is fall in love with foundation paper piecing. It's so fun. You achieve beautiful blocks that really can't be achieved any other way. So I think you can see this is absolutely beginner friendly. Head to the Shabby Fabrics website. Be sure to pick up foundation paper piecing series for this kit. Don't forget that thread set. We've already seen the add a quarter is where the magic happens, and be sure to pick up any notions you might need. I look forward to seeing you next month as we continue our brand new series.